Hello and welcome to the Soonicorn Summit Curtain Raiser. Today we have for you three interesting panel discussions, all to do with AI, because that's exactly the theme for our Soonicorn Summit, which is soon to be held on 22nd August in Bangalore. For our first session, we'll discuss AI for Bharat, how a localized data center can bridge the digital divide, how AI can build for Bharat. To bring in the first session, I'd like to invite Akhil George and the panelists that Akhil will introduce to you. All in all, we have three very interesting sessions. So, right from now till about 6 p.m., make sure that you're tuned into all the three panels. Let me also tell you the other two panels that we have today. The second panel, which my colleague Pratik Bhakta will moderate, is on combating financial fraud, how AI algorithms for real-time detection and risk management can help you, me, and a host of organizations to combat financial fraud. While AI is beautiful, it's beneficial, it's perfect, purposeful, and profitable, but it also brings in the risk of financial fraud, and that's exactly what we'll discuss in our second panel. The third panel, which starts around 5:20, will be all about AI and ethics. To what degree should one use AI? Do we blur the ethical boundaries that we have ourselves set in? And how innovation and manipulation is real in the deepfake era. So, here, three sessions for you all around AI, lots of discussions, and lots of interesting people to discuss them all. Thanks a lot. Won't waste much of your time. Over to you, Akhil, for the first panel discussion.
Thank you, Deepak. Hello, all. Today's first webinar will look at how localized data centers can help bridge the digital divide in India and harness AI for the entire country. To help us dive deeper into this topic, we have four industry veterans with us. We have Ankit Bose, who's the head of NASCOM AI. Ankit is an experienced professional with over 20 years of expertise in thought leadership, innovation, team development, and a strong drive to explore and develop new business units, tech, and service businesses. Throughout his career, he has held various roles spanning engineering, consulting, strategy, and more, working across continents and in sectors such as government utilities, telco, retail, and manufacturing. Ankit currently spearheads the AI vertical of NASCOM and is dedicated to empowering India by encouraging the industry to embrace AI and adopt digital technologies. He takes the lead in promoting ethical and responsible tech practices. Welcome, Ankit. We also have Jay Asundi, Executive Director of the Center for Study of Science, Technology, and Policy. Jay joined the organization in 2009 and has been involved in research and development projects in various areas. His initial work was in the field of emergency and disaster management. He has mentored teams across areas spanning climate, energy, and urban development. He also spearheaded the establishment of AI for social impact as a sector of work and helped with the creation of the Center for Air Pollution Studies at CSTEP. Welcome, Jay. Our third panelist is Abhinav Agarwal. He's the co-founder and CEO of Fluid AI. Abhinav is one of the founders, and Fluid AI's multi-agent platform helps enterprises automate workflows, make smarter decisions, and deliver human-like experiences. Their clients include Bank of America, Barclays, Societe Generale, Royal Bank of America, Toyota, Intel, and many, many more. Abhinav dropped out of an MBA degree at India's #1 institute to start his company, Fluid AI. He has been working deeply in AI research for the last 15 years. He was also named under the Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia list and the Fortune 40 Under 40 India list. Abhinav is a chartered accountant. However, he has always had a passion for coding and is also a self-taught coder. Welcome, Abhinav. And our final panelist, we have Adarsh Natarajan. He's the founder and CEO of Ahindra. Ahindra is a startup that develops products in the area of computer vision, a domain under artificial intelligence. His passion in leveraging deep tech to solve hard human problems saw him starting Ahindra Systems. This was chosen as a delegate of the Global Entrepreneurs Summit held in San Francisco in 2016, organized by the US government. He was also selected by the state of Karnataka to represent the startup community at BioKorea in 2016, and was also one of the 5 startup founders selected by the Department of Biotechnology to visit Cambridge in 2016. So, welcome to all of you. Why don't we start this webinar? The first question is to all of you. Maybe Jay, you can take the first question. In the context of AI for Bharat, what does that term really mean to you? How do you see localized data centers playing a role in achieving this vision? Maybe you can help us understand. First,
Good afternoon, and
yeah.
thank you for having me on this panel. I think this is a very pertinent topic. We've been thinking about AI for development and hence AI for India or AI for Bharat. The big aspect for us is about, are we solving problems for Indians? India is a diverse country. I think everyone knows that, many languages, but I think we also have a phenomenally large bureaucracy. I think the common man faces a lot of challenges when it comes to dealing with government services. Government plays a major role in people's lives. And so the question becomes, how do we make our systems better for all Indians? Now, AI, in my view, is a tool. And so the question becomes, how do we use AI for Indians so that it is inclusive? It cannot be only for all the technically savvy folks like us, but also for not only the farmer, but also the person who lives in the tier 2, tier 3 town, or that other person, or even the poor person in the city. The question for me is usually about, how will AI be inclusive, take people along, and solve the problems, the daily problems of livelihood, food, shelter, and safety. And so, in the sense of, question becomes, okay, what is it do we mean by localized data centers? I think it's important that the data that we generate or the data that we use is topical, is for Indians, and it is valid for Indians. It cannot be something that's been built on something that is non-contextual. And so the question becomes, is the data being stored locally? Are the models being developed for Indians? And so hence you have the localized data centers. I'll keep my answer short to let the other co-panelists jump in here. Thank you.
Yeah. Adarsh, anything to add to that? Or
Excellent points by Jay. Thanks again to everyone for having me on the panel to help, share my thoughts and perspectives on this topic. Absolutely right. For someone like Ainda Systems, which I represent, where we are building AI for early cancer detection and multiple types of cancers, where predominantly we want to take our solutions, or we are taking our solutions to the hitherto unsatisfied customers, which means that these are people who are spread across the larger parts of the country and who do not have access to tertiary healthcare centers. Some of these points that Jay made are extremely pertinent. We're building AI models for India using data of Indian, patients. And therefore, it becomes all the more important that our data stays secure, and no other. I mean, one of the I think healthcare is one of those domains where data privacy is of the utmost importance. Patient data is absolutely sacrosanct, and therefore the pertinent question of, where do you store this data? Where is it available for us to actually take and model around, becomes extremely important. And I think in this era where every aspect of technology is or can be and is being weaponized, I think this is absolutely an era where we really need to think long and hard about where are we storing our data, which is, as you all know, becomes extremely, extremely important for AI to reach its potential.
no, that's fascinating. Abhinav, anything to add?
No, absolutely. I think, when you look at generative AI models and, both hosting, running them off of India data centers, and at the same time looking at, uh, building our own foundational models, right? There are two concepts that we need to keep in mind, right? One is trust. Um, the ability for India to have and Bharat to have its own data in its own control, um, and the trust of what's being built, for who is it being built, and for what motives it's being built is very important, right? Today, I think people share some of their most critical data at a personal level, but even at an enterprise level, right? At Fluid AI, for example, we work with brands like Nabard or HPC, or a lot of these public sectors, private sectors, right? They're putting a lot of their core data in these platforms and foundational models. You can't have them moving to parties where you have no control and you don't know what people are doing with that. Number two, with trust, is controlling the narrative. That's another very, very important aspect. Today, we all have started to rely extreme layers on AI models for information, for understanding of how the world works and the overall narrative of the world, right? So I might ask an opinion from ChatGPT about Donald Trump, which will be very different if I ask a DeepSeek. It will be very different if I ask, let's say, an Arabic model. And if people are going to be driven, right? Earlier, people were all driven by information on Instagram, social media. Now, people are going to be driven by what the LLM tells them. And if India doesn't have those models, it's very easy for an external party or a country to control India's narrative very unknowingly. And that could be like a massive crisis at your hand, right? Imagine if someone held your entire public media and news media, they could really create a lot of havoc and change narrative which goes outside control. So I think those are two main reasons why I feel it's very, very critical for India to have sovereignty data centers in India where all our critical data is resting. Public private sector needs to have a lot of their models and work and their data resting here, as well as for general use foundational models from India that can have the right narrative.
No, that's a fascinating point. There is no truth with the capital T, right? There are different perspectives. And if we don't have our own model, then we don't have control of that perspective.
Correct.
Ankit, from you had the AI vertical for NASCOM. From your perspective, what does that mean, AI for Bharat? Anything
So
to
what?
add to others have said?
Yeah, I think wonderful points, said by my panelists, right? Again, AI for Bharat is basically uh, Indianized models having Indian, languages, Indian culture context, uh, and for Indians, right? Again, at the price, at the cost, what we can have, right? Right now, we are overloaded with the global models, right? So most of the models either are in the US or in China, right? What's happening is all that what they're building is from their western context, western culture aspects, right? If you read the current executive order from or AI action plan from Trump, what it says is he wants to retain culture aspects which is inherent to them, right? And what is culture aspect? DEI is a culture aspect for them, right? That's too different from the culture aspect what we have. So we have 22 languages and so many subdialects, and all of these have very specific cultural aspects which we would want to retain, right? I think that's very important. Again, that's one aspect. The other aspect is AI for social good, right? I mean, AI for Bharat is a biggest thing which can give the power to the deprived communities, the deprived folks in country, right? Taking healthcare, taking education, taking ways and means to access government policies and schemes in rural areas, in areas where real the needs are there. I think that's very important, right? And third definitely is the sovereignty, right? Again, when I say sovereignty, it's definitely a few aspects. One is the data center. The second is your own GPU compute cluster, right? Third is data. Fourth is definitely model, right? Again, fifth, I will say application, but application, I think Indians are predominantly very aggressive, or we are very, very, sort of ahead in terms of using AI for applications for India and globe. But again, I think that's what it is meaning for me.
No, that's interesting. Let's go a little bit deeper now into it. Jay, from a policy perspective, what regulatory or public-private partnership models could accelerate the development of these localized AI-ready data centers across India? Jade, can you hear me?
Apologies, I was muted. Yeah, so the first point I would want to make is something that even Sam Altman talked about when he was in India, was that the costs are so high that we would not be able to afford it. And that's essentially what it is. It is really, if you ask anybody who's trying to deploy AI today, one of the biggest challenges for production, not proof of concept, is about running AI models. Getting GPUs is very expensive. Running data centers is very expensive. And so the capex or even the running costs associated with setting up an AI system is going to be very high. So question becomes, how do we share these costs across various sets of people? And that is where your public-private partnership can come into play. The government could step in and maybe make the investments on behalf, and so let people bear the marginal costs as opposed to the average cost, which is what you would do when you include the capex as well as opex. So make people pay the marginal cost, or even maybe you subsidize it for certain sets of applications which are more inclusive, more useful for people within India. And then that is an opportunity that we can see that. And I think that's what the in India AI mission is looking to do, is trying to see if they can acquire AI assets in a relatively cheaper manner, because you're asking for a lot more, and then maybe farm it out to a number of people. I think it takes us back to the good old days of working on mainframes, as many of us did, is where we would have these jobs that we would give at various points in time and run them in those manners. So I think that is an opportunity that we could possibly see, given the fact that the costs are so high. And I don't think many of the small firms or individuals will be able to bear that very high cost, when either on developing models or collecting the kind of data that needed, and even processing the type of information we would need for a very good AI system.
Okay. Adarsh, I was going to ask you a question, but we've got an audience question that's basically the same thing, so I'll just ask that. How does data center proximity affect the deployment of healthcare AI solutions in tier 2 and tier 3 cities? I'm sure your perspective from Ayendra can help us.
Absolutely. So I'd like to just, before I jump into that question, Akhil, I'll just try to take off from where Jay left and made some extremely great points. For emerging economies like India, right, where we are obviously, and companies across the spectrum, putting in that kind of capex investment at this point in time, to both from an infrastructure perspective and from the other aspect of availability of relevant data. For example, from a healthcare perspective, this becomes even more challenging when the kind of data that's available for you determines the quality of your AI models, right? One is, of course, the quality of AI models, and then the ability to build better models where infra comes into the picture. I think it's a no-brainer to say that such initiatives require handholding from a policy level as well, right? Now, if you're talking about infrastructure, I think Jay already made that point, where it is not going to be economically viable or feasible for smaller companies, or even that kind of companies, to go all out and acquire the kind of capex investment that's required to put that infrastructure, right? And that's where, as wonderful example, right? Job cards, shared resourcing, all of that can come into picture to actually kickstart or provide a booster for all of us in this space to be able to make use of expensive infrastructure. Now, coming to the data part, healthcare data is extremely, and I cannot emphasize this as much as I can, but extremely difficult to come by. Right now, we could all work in our own silos, try and partner with a few healthcare institutions here and there, but it will never achieve the kind of scale that a initiative that is driven through a policy can provide. Right, that's where healthcare data absolutely anonymized, right? Because we, keeping in mind all the tenets of data protection and privacy in place, If that kind of data can be made available, now imagine the kind of ingredients that are now available in the petri dish for innovation to spark, right? You're going to have grassroots level innovations happening across a country in multifold, right? And I think that is where policy really plays a part. And I think, no one can emphasize it as, anymore, but I think it's well understood. Hopefully, bodies like NASSCOM can make that push and ensure that government plays a key part through its policies to enable this innovation to really kickstart. Or it's already started, but it can actually amplify as much as we can. Right, so that's kind of take off on Jay's question. Now, coming to the latter part of your question, Akhil, I'm sorry, it was a bit of a digression, but I thought it was very important to make this point. In terms of why it is very relevant from a tier 2, tier 3 towns, right? So let's say as a service or a solution provider, we are talking about deploying our solution, a computational pathology platform solution in tier 2, tier 3 towns. Now, imagine a scenario where the data from these centers, because once your AI model is built, we have to rely on those the infrastructure availability for the models to run. Now, imagine we do put it on a consumer grade device, which can be placed at the tier 2 town clinical setting. Now, let's say a new set of patients come and all of their data then, and if our models are running on the cloud, there goes to a US server or their data center where all of those models are running, and then you're trying to fetch them back. The sheer uncertainty with what can happen in this entire transaction with extremely sensitive data is something that gives all of us jitters, right? So which is where as much as possible we are not much as possible, we are absolutely placing our data in data centers placed out of India. And I think that is where proliferating these data centers across and making them available even as smaller centers, data centers, will go again a long way in democratizing access to those models to the more of the people. So that I think is my answer to the latter part of the question. Sorry if it was a long-winded answer, but hopefully I've answered those questions.
I get from NASSCOM's perspective. What is the current state of India's AI-ready infrastructure? How does it compare globally?
Yeah, it's a very interesting sort of question, right? Again, let me start with the comment, right? The comment is that India generates 20% of the global data, and we have less than or approximately 3% of global data center capacity, right? That's where we stand. And when we come to AI, I think we are even in a bad shape, right? Again, the total install base. So again, if I say data center, I think we might be okay. But again, when we say AI-ready data center, I think it's even critical. Why? Because the old data centers of the world or the facilities are meant for a lower, probably power and compute sort of facility. Right? They can support probably 15 kilowatt and below. The new age AI GPU clusters per rack, the need will be 30 kilowatt and above, right? And then that will go further up as it goes, right? So I think where we stand, I think the data center capacity for AI-ready clusters, I think is very low, right? There are certain efforts happening from Government of India, from industry players to build that, and that's getting built. That's a base data center capacity. But if I go up on the GPUs again are at a very very low availability, right? Again, there are a bunch of players who will only have GPUs, and that too, they've spent so much money and then they could, sort of get it back in India. But again, the point is that is that enough for India? I don't think. I think the total GPU compute in India will be not beyond 20 to 25,000 GPUs, right? Whereas one big company like Grok owns or has around 3 lakh GPUs themselves when they are building Grok 4, right? Again, that's a disparity. Again, the big corporates in US and probably big corporates in China will have X number of times GPU than us, right? As a whole country. So I think that's a big disparity, right? Again, as my fellow panelists said, India mission is trying to fulfill or reduce that gap, right? Again, they have promised that they will allocate around 20,000 plus GPUs to startups, to researchers. I think that's a very good step from government of India. But again, I think that also is going in steps, right? So it will go in phases. So phase one, I think we have provided some GPUs to few startups like Servam, like Socket, like GAN, right? Again, but again, I think, is that enough? No, I think there's more needed, more capacity which needs to be pumped in industry so that we can stay ahead in the global race. I think there is that's the state where we stand.
Mhm. Let's switch to the enterprise setting right now. Avinav, how do you see localized AI data centers impacting enterprise adoption, especially for companies that handle sensitive customer data?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I think there are, two key things that, as enterprises we need to be careful of, right? One is, I think the spending on AI, on LLMs, on these algorithms, etc., is just going to go up more and more increasingly, right? So you're going to see some tremendous amounts of spends coming through, that right now are actually going all abroad. So even if you look at like social media marketing spends, right, when an Indian enterprise ends up spending money on Instagram or Facebook, they're essentially moving all of that GDP, all of that foreign exchange to the US. Japan is facing a big issue about this right now. And the same is going to happen with AI. So if enterprises in India are going to all just move all and use external models, all of that GDP is going to flow out, all of that foreign exchange. The second problem is that I think that the ability to be able to be a low cost, fast, efficient for an enterprise, and like Ankit pointed out, right, be very culturally attuned to India. I think that's going to be a critical component for all Indian enterprises, right? If you're a bank launching a call center experience, you needed to speak 24 dialects, 30 dialects of the Indian language. Then only are you going to be able to deliver true value. You would want your AI to sound Indian and not like an American voice with an Indian accent associated with it. Right? And the third would be, like we said, the data part of it, right? Having the right data in place. I think what today prevents a lot of Indian investment in this space, right, to the public-private partnership model is largely two things. One is the availability of patient capital, right? VCs in the US have a slightly higher time horizon, right? 10 years, 12 years, they're okay waiting on a company making money. In India, the horizon is 5 to 7 years, which is slightly difficult to then raise capital to build a foundational model and then say, I will monetize it in the long run. That VC's exit cycle would be 5 to 7 years. He needs to exit his fund out. The second problem is that the larger enterprise in India, right, like the TCS, the Infosys, and no blame to them, because they're services driven, their ROI model is very different when it comes to technology investment compared to like a Google or a Facebook or Meta, who are essentially built to say, we are building great IP and we're going to monetize that IP. Whereas our best tech firms are built on, okay, I'm going to win these services enterprise deals and then deliver them and get value from them. So they're having them to then do massive investments in building IP and intellectual models becomes very difficult. That's where the government needs to step in and say, okay, I'll partner, I'll take some of the capital risk with you, whether you're a small startup or you're a TCS, and I'll help you build India's next foundational set. And that's what will enable all of these guys to then, even for companies like us at Fluid AI, like enable us to deploy enterprise AI at scale using a lot of the Indian stuff and then deliver that value.
What about the localized AI data center part? Is that extremely important to set
Yeah.
up more enterprises in rural places? Does that factor in?
No, absolutely. I think, firstly, I think the whole concept of having edge AI, which is like these small mini edge data centers, is becoming a really strong theme within both globally and in India. India more so because I think the ability to deliver the value at the edge is going to be phenomenal for enterprises. Second is obviously the latency, right? The ability to have these experiences is to be a lot faster, cleaner. Like when we host within India, we've seen the like LLM quality, like the quality of the experience just goes up massively because you're able to inference and even fine tune much faster, especially when you're moving large amounts of data. And third is compliance, right? Compliance becomes a big, big challenge if you're not going to host locally. So I think the whole trend we're seeing is massively to be local. And in fact, we're seeing brands like Nvidia, right? They're the biggest GPU hyperscalers are all coming from India now. Like the obviously US is the holy grail of the space, but the second market where we're seeing the bigger GPU hyperscalers come, who are being good matches to a lot of the international players, is from India. Right? So you take the top 3 or 4 big ones that have, I won't take names, but that have like big clusters within them and providing great prices. So I think that whole trend of localized hosting data centers within India, I think it's a phenomenal trend, and I think it's here to stay and only scale further.
Jay, at C-Step, have you seen other lessons from other countries' decentralized data infrastructure strategies that could maybe be adapted for India?
So we haven't really studied too much. Of course, there are 2 countries that overwhelm the information when it comes to AI. One is the US, and the second is China. And we hear a lot about that. I do hear about some stories about other countries like maybe Thailand, Singapore, and others that have, or even a few countries in Eastern Europe that have come up with strategic plans. But we have not heard too much about most of the other countries are small. They are not going to be able to generate the kind of data that you're talking about when it comes to India. So they are obviously going to use what is available in the global space. I think this is a unique perspective for India where we are also generating a lot of data. It's very important. I think others made a very important point on the healthcare side, is that we cannot be letting our healthcare data and our health data actually being residing on foreign servers. So we have to keep it locally. And since we are generating local data, we should also be using local models, local knowledge, local information. And so I think we do fall in a fairly unique place. And so the information that we have on international is immaterial. I think what we need to do is what is important for us. And so from that perspective, I think we may need to create our own models for what can work in India and work for all Indians.
Adarsh, we have an interesting audience question, again related to healthcare. How can localized data centers drive AI innovation in non-metro cities, and how can healthcare anchor broader AI adoption? I think that's a interesting point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, great question. And I think, I did give a few aspects about how innovation can be even more amplified and accelerated than what it is today. Just that we need the right kind of ingredients available, right? As I was just mentioning, and as Jay absolutely made a brilliant point, the availability of infrastructure first. That's ingredient one. The second ingredient is, of course, data, right? Now, when it comes to healthcare, I did mention that getting the right kind of data, right? And that's the biggest challenge that exists today. But getting the right kind of data is absolutely important. When I say right kind of data, I also mean the quality of the data, because the best part that I think Jay also alluded to is by the sheer population that we have, we are going to be driving tons and tons of data that we're going to be generating. What are we doing with it, right? Now, for example, compare a clinician in India versus a clinician in, let's say, UK, for example, right? The number of patients one clinician sees in a day in India is multiple times more than in UK. So in a 6-month period, a physician or a clinician in UK might have seen maybe 100, 200 cases, and they come to international conferences and talk about, we've seen about 200 cases with X condition, and therefore, this is it. Our physicians will be doing those numbers in a couple of weeks, right? So that is the kind of data that we are sitting on. We are sitting on mountain loads of data, but how are we going to make the data usable is a big question. And when you have all of that data, how can you then drive innovation with making all the available ingredients easily accessible to these innovators sitting out there? And finally, the point that Abhinav made was great, right? When you have these edge AI centers available, you're not really relying on mega infrastructure to be available to build your models, to deploy your models for inferencing. So, and the latency you don't really worry about, because in healthcare, let's say there is a quick turnaround required because the patient is captive in the clinical setting. and he could be a surgeon who's trying to see if there's any through a guided procedure like a guided FNAC or a ultrasound. He's trying to say, move left, move right, and therefore I can pick up certain cancerous cells from the lymph node, for example, right? That can't happen over a network that has a very high latency, for example, right? Now, so therefore the real time nature of that also comes into the picture, and having those smaller edge AI centers plays a huge part, right? And not to again overemphasize the part that since it's our Indian data that we're talking about, the security, the protection of our own Indian data should be a sovereign kind of an asset that we're talking about.
Well, we're running out of time. Ankit, quick question for you. Can you help us understand uh, how can these local data centers be positioned not just as infrastructure, but as enablers for AI startups and talent development across tier two and tier three cities?
Yeah,
Is that even
definitely.
possible right now? Are there enough data centers to do all that?
So I'll just touch upon one point which you mentioned earlier and then come to this very briefly. I think when we talk about global, sort of learning, right? Uh, Countries like France have put $109 billion just for AI infrastructure. US put $500 billion. UAE has put $100 billion, right? A small country like Singapore has put $1 billion, right? And our India mission is just $1.2 billion, right? Again, that shows the massive war chest countries are putting in this whole game, right? Again, that's very important. We should definitely learn from what they are doing, what we can do from what they have done, right? Again, each of these countries have their own LLM model. France has its own, UAE has its own, Germany has its own, right? Again, they have built their own models. India doesn't still have a for our own foundation model. People are building it, but again, still it's a nascent stage. Coming to the other question, briefly, again, see, data center is a big capex intensive project, right? 70% of the current data center capacity is in the metros, right? Again, these metros are Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, and Hyderabad, right? That's how it is. The tier two data center is definitely a good idea, but again, there has to be a good PPP partnership, right? Again, having said that, a lot of governments are coming out and offering that partnership to private parties, and there are a lot of discussions happening to build data centers in tier two, right? Like I can give an example. UP has been wanting to build an AI city in Lucknow, right? When we say AI city, definitely there will be a big data center cluster which will come there, right? Again, similarly, Odisha is talking. Similarly, Vizag or Andhra is talking. So there are a lot of states who want to do that. They are cultivating, but the nascent problem lies the same, right? Again, which private partner will take first step and build that data center there, right? Again, that has to be profitable, right, to be in the industry. And the other point to that, can this be a center of that AI movement in that city or state or region? I think data center building takes 2 to 3 years time, right? If we wait for this to happen next 2 3 years, we'll already lose the race, right? So the real momentum which is trying, which has been happening, and which is the effort of a lot of ecosystem players like NASCOM and others, is to catalyze this tier two academia and enterprise partnership, right? Again, there are a lot of emerging hubs which are having a lot of AI work happening from there. Like Kochi has phenomenal AI workforce there, right? With this, similarly, other cities also. Similarly, so the workforce being there, the academia being there, and government and a local ecosystem partner can build that momentum so that the skills can go up, the innovation can go up, the research can go up, right? I think that has to start now, and data center definitely will get built in these tier two cities. But again, I think if we just wait for that, we'll lose the momentum. It has to be synergistic and parallel activity. Okay.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. All you panelists were absolutely excellent. And especially the audience, thank you for sending all the questions. We're still getting questions from the audience, but we're out of time. So thanks, everyone. We'll be starting the next panel immediately. Prateek Bhakta will be taking it over. So over to you, Prateek. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Akhil.
Thank-
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all
you.
for a great session.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Hey, thank you, Amit. Thank you, Suhas. Thank you, Rohit, for joining. And so it's a pleasure to have you all here. Thank you for taking time out. And let me introduce the panel briefly today. We have Rohit Taneja. He's the founder and CEO of Decentro. We have Amit Das, who's the co-founder of Think360.ai. We have Suhas Gopinath, who's the CEO of Globals. So great to have you guys here today. Let us today's topic is around financial frauds and how AI is helping solve the issues around financial fraud. So let me first start off with the idea around financial frauds. One of the very key aspects is KYC, right? And KYC is very, very critical in this entire fight around financial frauds. Banks have been mandating it. The Reserve Bank has been on top of its game in order to ensure that KYC is done properly. So in that entire context, we are talking today. So Rohit, my first question is one of the key aspects around fraud management is given that it's KYC, and you process a lot of backends for banks and financial services firms. So how do you think AI is helping smoothen the entire KYC process? If we could start with that.
Sure, absolutely. Hey everyone, good to be here. Everybody, thanks for having me. I think two areas that really stand out, and we see that pretty much I would say on a daily basis with all our banking customers, and of course other I would say lenders that we interact with as well. I think the first one is just AI agents working for you and sending, say, for example, onboarding information, right? So one of the broken pieces, or rather one of the usual old pieces in banking has been people actually verifying whether the KYC is completed or not, right? So let's say somebody does the KYC, but then is your system really foolproof enough to verify the end go live, right? That do you want to give this guy a credit card or a loan, etc., etc. Then depending on the product that you're selling. So I think just that final leg of manual verification, that is redundant. And that connecting that end to end in terms of an automated verification is where an AI agent can actually be very helpful. And we are seeing some of the banks take interest in that at a very early stage. That's one. The second is more in terms of correlation of data points, right? And I think there probably might have been chat in this summit itself. But in general, you would have seen a very strong emphasis on alternate data points, on data points that are not captured as per the regular KYC process, but you can extract basis of users, device, phone number, etc., right? And then correlating that with what you have is where, again, it's a heavy manual intensive effort in the olden days. That can be changed. That is where AI can be very helpful. Yeah, so I would say these are like two high-level areas that I see immediately. Yeah.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you very much. We've got Ankur Pandey, who's the co-founder at Sciencey with us as well. And just to get him up to speed, we were having this conversation around KYC and how AI is helping smoothen the KYC processes, which is very critical to arresting financial fraud. And given you've just joined, and Sainzi is also on that forefront, working very closely with banks. Rohit has already commented on it. So Ankur, could you also chime in here with your insights on how AI can play a very critical role in solving the KYC issues which financial services players always grapple with?
Yeah, thanks, Pratik. Thanks for having me. So yeah, like Rohit correctly said, a lot of the processes which are essentially which have been dominated by the manual inputs and the verifications done on the back office sites, those are to a very large extent also transitioning, as well as there's a lot of aspects that can be transitioned, right? So while AI as a agentic mode is helping helping get everything streamlined in terms of organizing the structured data into a structured manner which a bank's internal system can understand, as well as you can convert that into fetching alternate data sources for the end users, right? So that is one aspect where we have been seeing a lot of traction happening these days, and it's very important that these transitions are also compliant with the regulatory norms. So at the end, you have to prevent the risk for the company who is doing the onboarding, as well as be ensure that it is compliant. So connecting it with different data sources and still maintaining the regulatory compliance is one challenge where people are grappling with. But yes, there is a lot of adoption in that.
Amit, this is a very, you've spent a very long time in data analytics and machine learning models. Banking has invested, the entire sector has invested a lot in building these ML models for credit underwriting, and you've seen it very, very closely through your long association with the sector. How is Gen AI or the latest versions of the models that are being made available right now changing those old or are disrupting those old systems?
Sure. Thanks. Uh, it's a so if you think about fraud as a problem, there is we always call it it's basically an anomaly, right? It's about things which are different from what they are supposed to be, right? A person impersonating another person. It's a transaction impersonating another transaction. It's a transaction executed when it should not have been executed, and so on and so forth. And when you kind of take the brass tacks of it, it's about infra, it's about data, it's about the inferencing there. Now, if you think about it, what has really changed? So in the last 10 years, the infra has changed dramatically because now everyone has internet, everyone has a life which is on internet. Everyone has a life which is reasonably, I would call it digital, right? Depending on where you are from, who you are, what you do in your day-to-day life. It could be for the sake of simple entertainment, or it could be that a part of your business is running on WhatsApp or something else. It's probably that you receive calls, if you make calls, if you have your bank link to Aadhaar, and so on and so forth. So a lot of tech enablement. The infra is a huge part of it. And what compared to, let's say, the first few decades, the last decade has generated a tremendous volume of data. And that's probably what Ankur and Rohit also referred to, right? Because unless you have that sort of a mass of data, and the infra which allows you to do the decision making, the inferencing in real time, in quasi real time, fraud remains a complex problem to solve. So earlier versions of fraud, the models that we used to build, were primarily about the data that the banks or the institutions would readily have access to. So you're looking at bureau files, you're looking at the customer information file, their basic KYC docs, and so on. And over the last few years, that has changed to something a lot more nuanced, I would call it, where you have streaming data from multiple partners also coming in. You are maybe trying to triage or triangulate the location they are logging in from. 2 years back, 3 years back, there was this whole thing about people holding up images, for instance, instead of the person coming on a KYC call, and so on and so forth. So lots of, one of the funniest things we say about fraud is that you will curb 100 ways of, fraud happening, and 100 first will pop up. So it's a living organism kind of a problem. There's no getting away from it. There'll always be a percentage that is going there. What is the percentage? How big is it? It's a problem. But the way current stack has changed is your data handling and inferencing layer has become magical, right? Reading a financial statement, easy. reading commentary, easy. Looking at this conversation and trying to put markers here which talk about sentiments, which talk about the emotions that you are carrying in the conversation. Possible now, right? Fudging or tampering of docs. Earlier, it was basically about triage, a text not here, a text not there, and those kind of things. Now it's starting to become a little more evolved globally in terms of document handling. So that inference layer, which is able to deal with image, text, voice, videos, everything, that is the magical part of it. And that's the part which is kind of taking this whole fraud detection as it happens to the next level.
No, absolutely. I think, like very rightly put, right? Like the ton of data that banks had, and now the entire situation changes with access having become so much easier, right? Like, and of course, there are these privacy data norms that are coming in, but of course, like you can train your models better now. Is one big takeaway, I guess. Suhas, I'll come to you for the international side of things, right? Like you've seen markets other than India as well, and you've looked at it very closely. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of frauds that we see in India vis-a-vis maybe in developed economies or maybe other developing economies, and how is it different, if it is at all, and how better or how different should our strategy be to deal with such attacks?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pratik. And I think the frauds, as Amit mentioned, I think the fraud itself is an innovation race between, of course, the fraudsters and also the defenders, right? So, and I think with India, it's very interesting because with kind of the digital adoption scale that we are seeing, which I haven't seen in across Europe or the US for that matter, and I think in across Europe, of course, there is a very interesting fraud that's going on is the fact that you have these apps like Revolut or cross-border payments where we've seen fraudsters coming up with techniques to of course bypass the TOTPs or the OTP itself for the second factor authentication. And I think in India we are at the scale where you you got digital adoption at a higher scale, and also payment velocity has also increased, right? Because of adoption of UPI and we linking Aadhaar and others. But the fact that in India, I think the digital literacy is kind of mediocre at scale, and it's unfortunately the fraudsters are the one. When we talk about the fraud, is where we see those users' data are the ones which are being harvested and are being abused. So I think identity theft is something very common across the globe, which we've seen it. But on the cross-border payment fraud is something that which I do not know if it's very common in India, but it's very common in across Europe, where they've been able to fake the invoices, they've been able to fake the SWIFT transfers itself, and they've authorized or impersonated as a customer to authorize a transaction to some other account. And as a company, when we had to step into digital forensics for these, I would say the customers who were victims of these frauds, it was very unfortunate to say that millions of dollars or millions of euros were lost because of these frauds of impersonation.
Interesting. Yeah, I think you mentioned a very vital point about, like, well, obviously digitization has taken like, has grown exponentially in India. Maybe digital literacy is something that has kind of lagged behind, which I think is very critical to, for consumers also to protect for something like, instance, for their bank accounts or their maybe their passwords. That kind of puts a lot of systems at risk as well. I'll come back to Rohit. Because you pitch to banks, you have these conversations with large traditional financial services players. How do you see their responses towards fraud having changed over the years? Are they doing enough? Are they open? Are they more ready to pay? What kind of changes are you observing?
Right. They're definitely open. I think that has changed for sure. I think just the sophistication, as Amit was mentioning, has become so high of the fraudsters, and there's never-ending stream of the sophistication that comes on every year. The banks definitely realize that, right? So they're not averse to trying out new things. I think from a trial perspective, from doing experiments, they definitely are open. That's the first thing. Payment as well, I would say, at least in the initial signs are promising. I think another interesting thing here is, and again, you would appreciate that from a regulatory perspective, the banks have to listen to, of course, what RBI says. That's their first and foremost thing. Everything else comes secondary, right? So, given that RBI itself is very proactive, and RBI wants banks to invest in anti-fraud tech, anti-nude accounts, all those things, really identifying and going out of the way, to make sure that their customers are safe and there's no fraud penetrating the system. Hence, that investment is all, right? So the banks have to create budgets to accommodate that. So that's I think, the clear telltale sign that we see in our conversations with the banks. They definitely have budgets. How much they will spend, that's a question that needs to be seen. It's very early. Probably the next year we'll have more clarity on that. But yes, I think both in terms of intent to try and intent to pay, it's there.
No, absolutely. In fact, I think there's another aspect altogether around regulations, and I would like Ankur to chime in here. Like, with the mandates coming in, has that impacted the sector a lot? Why I'm asking you this question is also I'm trying to understand that, is it spontaneously coming from the institutions themselves, or is it more like a push from the regulator that is encouraging this move?
Generally, it's an ecosystem shift. So it's not definitely a spontaneous or something that was unprecedented. So ecosystem requires certain things which regulator also respects. And like Rohit also correctly said, both the KYC and financial transaction frauds have been changing, and banks are very adaptive to it. Sometimes it's a regulator push. A lot of times it's them trying to prevent the financial and regulatory risks proactively. So starting from preventing mule accounts as an instance, uh, identifying complex algorithms. Can we find more than instead of just doing a basic check whether this account belongs to this person or there is a potential of a risk there, can we also identify patterns in terms of siphoning of money from or just transactions done for the sake of transactions, or this was a transaction not authorized by actual owner, which is according to the bank. So there has been experimentations. The willing to experimentation is definitely there, and I mean, they are ready to pay as well. So, but again, it's an evolving thing, and we'll see how it turns over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also the rest, because fraud is evolving so quickly, the responses to fraud is also evolving with time. So that's something that we should watch out for. I think we have an important question from the audience. So I'll let me shoot this towards Amit. Data sharing and collaboration between financial institutions is very critical in fighting fraud. We have seen of I4C playing a very critical role, the Home Ministry playing an important role in bringing financial services players together onto one platform. But at the same time, banks or legacy players tend to be a little bit guarded about their own private data. So how important is data sharing? If you could throw some light on that. Amit, if you can.
Sorry. I think I was about to take the conversation there because fraud almost handling starts as a principal party issue, right? If I, as a financial institution, don't tag the fraud as fraud, then the so-called evidence never gets created, the pattern never gets recognized, and so on and so forth, right? So data sharing is critical, and it's no different from how bureaus evolved now, probably more than a couple of decades back, right? When it started, institutions were a little cagey about sharing their data. Then the second phase of it was that only the negatives data was being shared. The third state was that all the liabilities data started getting shared, they started getting used, and so on and so forth. Fraud has a limited repository, according to me, compared to what, let's say, credit risk has had, if I may. Because there's almost also a perverse joy in looking at somebody else and saying, oh, that he got conned, but our processes are better and we don't get conned, right? Sort of a thing. The second challenge there is what I call as incentives. So if a fraud makes you lose 2% or 5% of your wealth, you'd be worried. But if a fraud happens in your life that makes you lose $50 on the street, you're not going to tell everyone around saying that, I got conned, right? And you probably, and in the case of institution, you probably have that entire risk mitigation or risk management or portfolio risk management sort of a philosophy, which has budgeted a certain percentage, low percentage number as part of the risk or the losses that you'll have because of frauds. Now, as long as you're not reaching that, you have no real incentive to kind of either increase, decrease, or change anything that you're doing. And your hope is that somebody else is creating a fraud repository that you can bank on. But we are in that journey. I think Kotak, Mr. Kotak had a lot of views, I think a year or 2 years back, about how institutions don't share the relevant fraud data. And you have those examples from the ecosystem that you can solve fraud as a proprietary problem. That is, I'm working with bank one, bank two, and I'm solving for them using all the data that they have access to. Or I solve the problem at an ecosystem level. I think both have started happening now. Earlier, it was more of the former. And I think we have spoken on this topic in the past offline. I believe that if you really want to solve fraud as a regulator in India, then you need to get telcos and RBI to wake up one morning and say that I want to solve it tomorrow morning and it'll get solved. Because this whole SIM spoofing, numbers getting harvested, etc., etc. It's a lot easier now with the whole KYC infrastructure that we have and the kind of data infrastructure that we boast of today in terms of microservices, in terms of repositories that we have. It should have been a little easier to solve if we can get our egos aligned a little bit.
Yeah, in fact, that's a very important point, and it brings me to my next question, and that's towards Suhas. And do you see at a macro level the government doing enough? And why this is critical is when we are talking about different sectors bringing together not only finance, but the telecom, the finance, or maybe where METI comes in, where there's a technology side of things, where the IT ministry gets involved. Do you see the government doing enough in India at this point in time around financial frauds?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, Pratik. And actually, as Amit mentioned, that in case if they could park their egos and if they all can talk, I think that's going to solve multiple problems. And I sit on some of the advisory committees within the government itself. So, but I'll not be able to comment much against the government. But I can very well tell you that I think the intent is there with every ministry, right? As you mentioned of I4C, you've got National Cybersecurity Coordinator who also oversees if there are scams and frauds. So from the top office of the NSA to everyone has the right intent to, of course, address this. But the problem here is you got METI that wants to do an hackathon where they want to do something like an action fraud that's done in the UK, but then you do not have the blessings of RBI or NPCI there. So, and then you got Department of Telecom, which comes up with its own portal to see in case if you could go to the portal to actually check in case if your KYC details have been abused and if there are SIM cards that are issued in your name that you've not authorized, right? So the problem here is it is similar to the national intelligence grid where we've got an intelligence grid, but the problem is the agencies don't want to share information. And I think it's very, very important that at least if we could have a platform like which is a federated platform for sharing of fraud intelligence, where you don't have to share the customer data, you can still hash it. But in case if this platform is built and if that openness is created, right, amongst the fintech financial institutions and at a global level as well, I see that is missing, right? So I for sure know at least European Union has some mechanism to address this, but it's also very important to understand incidents or it could be AI powered fraud or synthetic IDs that are happening in the international market. So at least if you're able to get those TTPs or the attack vectors, which as the fraudsters are following it, I think with those intelligence, we'll be able to do it. In fact, I was telling somebody in also in the Ministry of Finance and also in Ministry of Electronics and IT in METI, telling that like the way in cyber world we do something called red teaming, right, where you actually mimic an attack. So it's also very important if banks and NBFCs can undergo the red teaming on fraud, so that you could use certain tools to do a fraud attack, so that you can see if if your platforms are actually resilient to these kind of attacks.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very valid point. And I think a lot of these mock tests or mock drills need to be carried out across all kinds of systems, in fact, to get them stronger, I think, and build systems which are safer. But at the same time, I'll come back to my initial point with which I started this conversation, which is around KYC. And I'll double down on the AI aspect of it. And this question, I'll first ask Rohit and then I'll go to Ankur. A lot of brands, a lot of businesses think of KYC as a friction point, right? Like, they want to grow fast, especially when we are talking about fintechs, new age startups. They want to grow really fast and they think of KYC as a friction point. Can AI solve that? Can you automate systems so much that, and if at the same time they remain effective, that, there's no glitch or there's no hiccup in the onboarding process for a customer?
Right. Yeah, it's fairly early, actually, Pratik, I think on that front. I'm sure some companies have already started thinking on that. Maybe not in India yet, but definitely abroad. I think a great way to probably use AI, and I think Amit hinted on that sometime earlier, is probably as a gatekeeper, right, as well, to some extent. So not just like augmenting your process and removing, reducing manpower, of course, which are the obvious aspects which we already covered. But also saying, okay, you are essentially operating at a 98% approval rate right now. Maybe you are being too lenient, in terms of your customer onboarding. So can we slow down and also review some of the medium risk customers that are passing through automatically, right? And reduce that onboarding maybe from 98 to 95%. So still not a big impact in terms of top line, and the overall customers onboarded, but definitely slightly better in terms of risk levels. But it will take a while, right? Because designing that kind of an AI system which understands your full onboarding journey, it has to be very contextually aware on what you really want to do. And then ultimately an AI is a machine, right? So you have to really feed the instructions in the first place. The instruction also has to be very clear in terms of what your ultimate goal is. That's why I think it's slightly away, because a lot of these fast-growing companies, as you mentioned, on the consumer side, they're trying to figure out their goal, right, on an annual basis. And if the goal is just growth, then AI can just, I would say, be a passive observer and more like a passive post-facto review. But if the goal is sustained growth, right, then yes, it has to be ideally a gatekeeper, which is slightly more complex to do.
No, in fact, that's like the gatekeeper angle is very important, and I'll take that point and take it further to Ankur. What about payment frauds, right? Like, and these are on the go transactions that are happening. Can you stop a fraudulent transaction from happening before it actually takes place, or on the fly? Are we at a position where it can be alerted and those transactions can be stopped? As of now, as per my understanding, it's still a grievance kind of a mechanism that I have faced a fraud attack. This much money has gone to the wrong beneficiary. What do I do now? But can we flip it and make it in a way so that we can stop or red flag such transactions on the go itself?
You can again, like, so essentially, see, AI can't run at a speed that you allow it to complete a transaction at 200 millisecond and also do the validation, right? So it has to be a retrospective thing. What your AI can do is it can modify and enhance the rules that run during that transaction, looking at like backtesting the transactions. It can be at any frequency, previous 5 minutes, previous 24 hours, and certain behavioral patterns can get, like, AI can instead of running live, AI can set the rules which run on the fly. So what we're talking about is essentially an on the fly monitoring, plus like not running it in a detection mode but running it in a prevention mode, right? But the challenge occurs when the false flags happen. You don't want a real transaction to just get blocked and lead to a very bad experience for the user. Probably, if I were a user, if my transactions get blocked 2 or 3 times where I was the real transaction maker, I would probably stop using that service altogether. And similarly for UPI as well, right? So it's a important thing, similar to KYC. While people think that it is like friction point, but again, you have to do what you have to do, right? Can AI make improvements? It's already doing it. In fact, we see a lot of products which implement use of even LLMs in order to do the backtesting and trying to identify the patterns. On the gatekeeper side, again, it's about the goals that you want to achieve, right? And what is the level of like your tolerance for the fraud, and till what, how much tightness do you want in the knob that controls that. It's a business decision by the owner and the custodian of that risk. But again, it can be not like turned knob can be turned enough to stop it fully, but again, which leads to more bad experience. But again, you have to find this right spot for both in terms of the recall and the precision.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, what's important here is also to make it a smooth process all throughout. Like you said, that a customer experience should not be jeopardized. That impacts the brand at a completely different level altogether. But at the same time, obviously, it's a brand whose name is at stake. If there is a big bang fraud attack, it's a huge hit on the brand itself. So there's a balance that both of them need to draw. That's absolutely perfect. Also, like, if we could talk a little bit about how, there have been so many instances of fraud attacks, and I would love to go to each one of you. And I'm sure you would have seen in your scope of work or in your area of expertise certain very interesting or instances or cases of fraud. Would you be able to talk a little bit, of course, without taking specific names, what happened and how was the reaction that would throw some light on what's the real life scenario like for a fraud attack from a business point of view? Ankur, if you want to go first.
Yeah, again, it's a sensitive thing. I'll not pinpoint, but I'll try to point at the areas where this is occurring. One is obviously deepfakes, with the videos and the images being generated in a manner which even AIs can't detect themselves whether an AI generated it. And so many models running and so much noise addition. So deepfakes is a big challenge. This is leading to people just trying to impersonate somebody else, and this number of cases has definitely increased over time. The other area is the identity frauds, right? So we used to have great fraud detection engines and forgery detection engines, which used to work back 5 years back. Like a well-crafted forgery, none of the current state of the art engines can even like. And instead of actually finding the fraud identities, they keep on flagging the real ones as fraud. So it has evolved a lot, and this has caused like we see a lot of instances where the customers onboardings happen. But again, the most important thing is what kind of system do you have at the final level, where while they pass through the initial stages, at the end, can you stop it, and do you have a retrospective mechanism to catch and prevent it for causing further damage?
Suhas, would you like to talk a little bit about
Yeah,
something interesting that you might have seen from your vantage point?
yeah. I got multiple instances, but I think the most interesting was a synthetic ID. It's not identity theft, but a synthetic ID itself that's created by AI, where the fraudster, which is a group that has which has gone to an extent where they've also created a company by the synthetic ID and have open bank account, which mimics the actual vendor's bank account or the actual victim's bank account. And they've managed to convince the customer of the victim to actually do the transfers to their account. So it was a combination of fraud plus a cyber incident, because they've compromised using phishing. They've compromised the payer or the buyer's email account. I mean, sorry, vendor's email account or the victim's email account, and they've sent an email saying that because of the regulation, our bank accounts have to be shifted to the UK, and you'll have to do the wire transfer to this particular account, which also has the same company name. And the buyer has obliged to this request, and they have actually deleted in the sent items. They've added forwarded rules, and the most interesting was they've used synthetic IDs where so a person never existed at all. So including fake passports and identity cards. So yeah, I think it's very complex, and of course, multiple countries are involved in actually solving it. And the impact was not very small. It was about $4.5 million US. Yeah.
That's a that's a great example. Thank you for sharing with us. And why these are the things that make these conversations around fraud interesting, right? Otherwise, it's a word on the page, but when you actually experience it or go through it, the innovation, the thought processes that go behind, creating one fraud attack, it's amazing. It's very interesting to know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suhas, for sharing that. Amit, could I ask you to go next? Like, anything that you would have seen during your career around something innovative or something around fraud? You're
Lots of lots of stories, but always. I mean, like this example, in this case, you're talking about synthetic ID. Now you change the synthetic ID to willful manipulation, and you would have an example of, and by the way, the brilliant fraudsters are not first timers. So they build momentum before they kind of take a big chunk of your flesh out. So sometimes it's very difficult to catch them as they build this momentum. So for example, you have entity one, entity two, both are essentially shell entities, money moving between them, P&Ls getting created, a line of credit is taken, and then the next morning there's nobody there, right? So our due diligence on the company formation for a very long time has been shaky. From there, you can create employment records. So we remember this case where the employment was there, the salary slips were there, everything was nice and easy, and there's a PAN that exists, and so on and so forth. And the guy took a home loan for a job that, on the basis of the salary of a job that never existed. We saw a case where somebody, as an insider, figured out how gold is evaluated in a gold loan case, right? So you have those sort of spectrometer kind of stuff that analyzes whether it's a gold or not, and they knew the depth to which it actually measures. So it does not need to be fully gold. It needs to be till a certain micrometers depth, so to speak. He took the pains to create like 40 gold bangles with plating, which was just enough to pass detection. And for the same NBFC, the guy went through like, the whole thing was flagged on the 22nd deposit, because you're talking about an era where dedupe was not really common, and all of us, deal with it now like an infrastructure problem, that if you show up at three branches of the same bank trying to take a loan, it's not going to happen because the IDs have been kind of managed in a certain way. So, I mean, every piece of the process that you have, which allows, so it's a hole in the fence kind of a problem. So I take this tiny thing and I start stretching it to see how much I can take out of this hole as a problem statement, and then I start solving for it. That's the whole Jamtara universe of transaction fraud management, I would call it. They engineer way more. Fraudsters are smarter than people like you and me, I guess. So there's a lot of engineering involved in the way they orchestrate this. And their biggest friend is, I would call it, law and order. So we refer to this golden 5 hours, golden 30 minutes, golden whatever, for catching the bad apples. And that's the magic. The way to curb fraud sometimes is not to curb fraud, but to catch the thief. That's where I think we need to do a lot more investment. So this whole point about online dispute resolution, online detection, fraud detection post facto, like we said, right? A transaction system has to manage a lot more complexity in execution. It can't have AI models running all the time with access to all the data that exists. But if something were to go wrong in that 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 10 minutes sort of interval, you have enough time to catch the perpetrators. And I think that is probably going to be the next wave of innovation that all of us are kind of trying to figure out. But too many stories being the point.
Yeah, no, in fact,
one funny one was when the village leaders were involved in insurance KYC fraud. So effectively, it's a very dark one that people were dying and the
People were
insurance
dead. Yeah.
claim settlement was going somewhere it was not supposed to go.
Yeah. No, in fact, gold loan frauds. There are so many stories around gold loan frauds, right? And when the market also exploded, I would have these conversations with a
Easy to
bunch
sell,
of
right? And it was
NBCs.
easy to sell. So
Yeah.
that,
No,
that's it.
absolutely. Thank you, Amit. Thank you for sharing such insightful examples. Rohit, we would hope the best to come from you. Something really fascinating to end this conversation with. But please share something from your side.
Right. No, again, no shortage of those examples, but I'll share one which we recently came to know, and I think it's a very unique one in the sense that um, I would not have thought of it in the first place that something like this would exist. And again, I think goes back to the whole ingenuity of some of these structures. So this is basically I mean, people basically buying cars, right? And some of these softwares, what they do is when they are buying cars, obviously they create first of all an identity which is not their real identity. That's one. Um, but let's say they want to buy a used car, and before ultimately they want to finance it because again they are forced, they don't have that capital to buy the car in the first place. They'll make the spot payment, like the first block payment, a small 50K deposit or something. They'll take the finance before the RC gets financed and before the car gets financed itself. They will sell the car back to the platform, right? And they'll take the whole amount, and then the law enforcement will come to know, hey, actually this car was supposed to be financed, or actually the bank will come to know, the lender will come to know this car was supposed to be financed, and it has to be seized back. So ultimately, the platform loses the entire value of the car, right? So very sort of unique kind of thing in that small window before that actual loan gets approved, and the car gets tagged as a financed car, is when this one happens. So yeah, that's one fairly interesting, unique example that I came to know just very recently.
Great. Thank you, Rohit. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. Thank you, gentlemen, all of you, for being part of this lovely panel. It's always interesting to learn more about fraud and discuss this, because that's how I think the systems can get better and only they can get stronger. Thank you very much. And that's all from my side. I have Vaibhavi, my colleague, who's waiting on the other side to take it ahead around AI's ethical crossroads around innovation versus manipulation in the deepfake era. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks a lot, Pratik, and thanks for all the panelists for their very insightful discussion around fraud detection. And good evening and welcome to all of our viewers and our panelists to the ultimate session of the evening for ET Soonicorn Sundowner. My name is Vaibhavi, and we are going to be discussing the topic AI's ethical crossroads, innovation versus manipulation in a deepfake era. And as we know, the AI is obviously rapidly reshaping the way that we see the world, the way the things happen around us, and we find ourselves at a crossroads. AI's immense power is obviously driving a lot of new waves of creative innovation, and yet it also opens the door to a lot of unprecedented risks. And the main one among them is the rise of deepfakes and digital manipulation. I'm very excited to be speaking with two people with a lot of background in this and around this very pervasive topic. We have Santosh Phad from the Think Sharp Foundation, and we have Rohit Kumar, the co-founder of the Quantum Hub. So welcome to both of you, and thanks a lot for joining us in this discussion. Let's dive into it right away. I want to start with a question for both of you, of course. Deepfake technology, of course, is showing the dual nature of AI. The same algorithms that are sort of enabling creative expression and accessibility across the internet, they are also facilitating the rise of disinformation and harm. So how do you think we can navigate this fundamental tension that always exists between innovation of these technologies and also the potential misuse that they end up when they end up in the wrong hands? Rohit, do you want to start us off?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me, and really glad to be sort of speaking here. I think the question you've raised is, very pertinent. But I would say that is the thing with any technology, right? The technology in itself is neutral. The question is, how do we sort of use it? And with AI technology, I mean, the technology is absolutely very, very powerful. There are a lot of positive use cases as we've already started seeing. In fact, in TQH, at the Quantum Hub, we do a lot of work on disability as well, right? And increasingly, it's being realized that the AI technology can do a lot in making our world more accessible in terms of, for instance, using lip syncing, dubbing, and many other things. So deepfake creating using AI to create video content that is not entirely human led and human sort of manufactured is likely to happen, and it has very positive use cases. But at the same time, it is likely to be misused by actors, that are likely to benefit from that particular misuse. We've had increasing sort of cases of malicious content being circulated, especially targeted at women. We've had audio calls being received by parents sort of claiming their children are in distress and to transfer money. So I think this is inevitable. The question is that how do we sort of mitigate the potential negative use cases while promoting the positive ones? And I think it's a difficult regulatory balance to achieve, but there is potentially a way ahead. I'm happy to come to that. Maybe Santosh would like to go first, and then I can sort
Sure.
of.
Santosh, do you want to add something?
Okay, thanks. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Vaibhavi, for having me here. And Rohit, you correctly said, now we know what are the challenges and how we are tackling the AI. A lot of time, the kind of the phone calls we are getting, especially the cybercrime which is happening with respect to the banking fraud or with respect to any other. I think everyone is facing the challenge. But I think we have to prioritize that in terms of dealing with that, like which is a high risk and which is the lower risk. I think
Right.
especially when it comes to the banking, which is most high risk, in terms of political campaigns. We all have seen in every state or the country level, elections, how the AI can be useful and could be the dangerous at the same time. Okay. So I think we have to categorize what is the risks and what is the lower risk. Accordingly, then probably we can come to a solution, come to some kind of answer to that. So that is what I feel. So prioritizing the defect cases.
Right. And Rohit, would you want to expand on what you were saying earlier about the potential misuse that will end up happening for these technologies?
Yeah, and I think, see, we do talk about examples of misuse, but I think sometimes in these conversations, we miss the broader risk that is there. So Santosh spoke about election misinformation, right? And election
Yeah.
disinformation. Now, in the run-up to the Indian elections, that was a very huge risk. And if you remember, the government had come up with the AI advisory, which many in the industry thought was a knee-jerk reaction to trying to solve the problem. The government had gone to the extent of saying that before any new particular AI model or any major upgrade is launched, the government needs to have a say and look at it to see that this is good to be rolled out. So, which is akin to licensing. And now, when you subject something, an ecosystem to that kind of checks, it essentially becomes akin to a license raj and will slow down innovation. So that is one thing the government has said. The government in that advisory had also told all social media intermediaries that under the existing information technology law, they enjoy safe harbor protections. And if they don't take down any of this content and it leads to harm, then they will lose that safe harbor protection. But now, if you think from the social media perspective, the volume of content that is being uploaded is so much, and detection is not always easy, right? So it's very hard to sort of mitigate some of these things. So, but there are multiple risks that can happen. Cyber fraud, we've seen impersonation, all of that can happen. But I think the fundamental risk that is underlying across all of this is the lack of trust in the information ecosystem. So far, whenever we received a picture or whenever we received a video, we assumed it as a documentary proof that this happened, right? So you looked
Right.
at it and you said that, okay, this happened, so I can believe it. But now every content that you receive, even if there was a research that was commissioned which said that the trust in the information ecosystem will reduce even if there are some false, images, information, videos circulating around, even if everything is not false. So the mere existence of something false can reduce your trust in the information ecosystem. But what that
Right.
will basically mean is that all of us will spend a ton of energy trying to vet information that we receive that we earlier used to take it for granted as true. So the moment you get a picture, so let's say you get an incriminating picture, the moment you get that, you will speak to people to trust, figure out if it is true. If there is somebody caught taking corruption, on a video, the opposition may want to circulate it, but you may not believe it. They can easily say that, this is false. So the problem that happens with this larger issue of AI generated content and deep fakes is that the trust in the information system reduces, which will actually have an effect on economic development. So in economics, there is a very strong correlation between trust in society and the speed of economic development, because transactions become faster when there is trust. But the
Right.
moment you break that trust, transactions will become slower. So I think there is a much larger risk that all of us are likely to face. So it is important that we step up and address the negatives early before a larger damage is done.
Understood. Understood.
Just
And
to
I think,
add, Rohit, I think
yes. Yes,
even
Santosh.
government is aware, and everybody is we are aware. But I think we look at the bottom of the line. We look at the mass level, the last mile person. Because most of the time, if you look at the most of the fraud is happening, or the most of the data is consumed by the rural population. Okay. Now in cities, in metro areas, we are kind of aware, and we can sense, okay, what is AI generated content and what is the real content. Though we are not that, we don't have that tools to identify which is AI generated and which is the real. And I'm sure today or tomorrow there will be tools where we can find which is the AI generated content and which is the natural or original content, which will be required to everyone. But if we look at the 70% of rural population, they easily consume that content and they believe, okay, what they have seen is absolutely true. So I think creating that awareness, creating that, or reaching to the rural population and making them aware to identify the content, because they are the larger population who are going to face the bigger challenge, or bigger problem for the AI.
No, absolutely
Un-
not disagreeing with what you're saying. Rural is definitely an issue, but even in urban, the marginalized, and even Santosh, I think you would agree that even people like us have been fooled. I have been fooled. There are colleagues and family members who've been fooled, and the tech is only getting more and more sophisticated by the day.
Definitely.
True.
I think there is an embedded cynicism that has come into all of us, the way that we interact with media, because we can't immediately be sure whether now this is something that is authentic or no. And that's very interesting, because the next thing that I want to get into is that there is an ongoing debate around this as well, right? That there are platforms whether people should proactively detect and remove synthetic content, or they should be transparent and label those contents, and so that people know, because these technologies are not really going anywhere and you will end up
Yeah.
interacting with them. So how do we balance this need? Because we either have to we have to do this, or we need to, and we also need to protect legitimate creative expression that is happening even through these digital images. So how do we balance those two, and which side would you fall on? Maybe Rohit can go first.
Yeah. I mean, see, it's a very difficult balancing act because, for instance, if you remember in 2020, I mean, I think when OpenAI first launched, then until in 2020, 23 and beginning, etc., they launched the AI detection tool, which I
Right.
think by July 23, they had withdrawn, saying that it
Yeah.
is not very accurate. All of us, like, in the organizational work that we do, we often test material for AI generation. People submit applications to us, there's a lot of material that comes our way, we submit it to different detectors, and the results are often very different. There
Right.
is no tool that is absolutely perfect, number one. Number two, the tech is getting better and better, more sophisticated to avoid detection. Some
Yeah.
attempts have been made, for instance, watermarking, labeling. So, there is also a coalition of content provenance, that is C2PA standard, that is being developed, wherein a lot of these companies like, Sony, Microsoft, others have joined in to say that all of us will follow standard practices of labeling content with its history of editing, right? So a camera
Right.
captured it, that is encrypted and recorded into the content. And then some editing happens, that history is recorded into the content. So the next time when this content is displayed on a particular platform, that platform can read the history of editing to, highlight whether it is AI generated or not. Some of this is happening, but there are challenges. Firstly, this kind of a technology and this thing relies on uniform adoption of these standards. And let's say hypothetically, which in itself is a very tall ask, that getting everybody in the ecosystem to use this standard, right? But let's say hypothetically, you are eventually able to get everybody in the ecosystem to adopt this standard. But we are still relying only on the good actors. The bad actors will intentionally avoid using it. So occasionally there will be things that will slip through, which will
Right.
not have this right kind of labeling and which will deceive and mislead. And some of the problems are harder in encrypted platforms. So let's say something is uploaded to Facebook. It's a public platform. Maybe the platform will detect it. It will sort of display the watermarking. Somebody may even add a comment under it saying that, please be careful, this seems fake. But when
Yeah.
something is transmitting between end-to-end encrypted platforms, how do we even detect, what's going around? So I do feel that there are some natural limitations to some of this as well. So eventually, one of the core things that we will have to do is also build the resilience of the audience to be a little bit more critical of the information they consume, which is the point that Santosh was saying. In
Right.
addition to perhaps strengthening criminalization of misuse. Though
Right.
in our law, some of these provisions already exist, but there are countries across the world that have started coming up with specific provisions. So I think
Right.
this is what we'll have to do. And eventually, I feel that ultimately, as new tools and systems develop, humans also adapt to figure
Right.
out how to interpret with that information flow. So maybe that's where we'll have to go.
Santosh, what do you think? What do you think about the balance, about whether we should remove these altogether or we should keep them and then label them by the platforms?
No, just to add with the Rohit, and as you correctly said, it's
Yeah.
not that easy, labeling each and every content.
Sure.
There are millions and billions of content is getting uploaded. Okay, I receive at least 100 videos and images every day on my WhatsApp, maybe more
Hmm.
than that. How many times I'm going to check or recheck that content, whether it's AI generated or it's a real? And where is the and there is no any universal platform, as Rohit said, where the content is already generated, either it's AI content or the real natural content. But yes, we can look at some developed countries, what they have adopted so far. So because obviously we are not the leader in AI, but there are countries who are the already leader in the AI, and they have also faced the similar challenges, how they are protecting their citizens. Okay, maybe the US or the rest of the other world. We have to look at those the case studies which we can adopt easily here. And I think recently government of Maharashtra, they have taken one good step, to protect cybercrime, to protect the challenges from the AI. I think we need to every state, or in fact the central government needs to be formalize the policy, a strong policy to protect each and every citizen from the the bad effect or bad side of the AI. And obviously there are, as I mentioned, the other countries who are adopting, and probably we can also make those changes in our policy and make the strong policy. I think that could be the best thing to balance it, or else reaching out to the billions of people and asking them to use some tool will be the very, very difficult. Having a good and strong policy, I think that could be the probably one of the solution to balance it.
Understood. Understood. That's interesting because I agree that policy is ultimately where we are headed when it comes to handling of these deepfakes in a more in a larger scale. But I will come back to policy in a bit. In a bit, I want to talk about the technology itself a little bit before, because there's an ongoing debate. There's always information around these things, but there is also an arms race that is sort of happening between deepfake generation and its detection. So for every 100 deepfakes that are coming out and there's technology that we come up to detect it, another 100 pop up from somewhere else. So do you think this race is something that we can actually win against something like this, or is there a race at all? Either of you can go first.
Yeah, Santosh, do you want to go first? I can come in
No,
after that.
you may, no problem.
Okay. See, I think there is definitely a race, but I don't think it's a race that can be won once and for all.
Right.
I mean, and I think the best analogy is cybersecurity, right? I mean, the cybersecurity threats keep evolving. We keep getting additional patches from the companies that run our antivirus, etc.
Right.
We've not managed to eliminate cyber fraud. In fact, in many ways, it has reinvented and remanifested itself, and every day we are subject to a new kind of challenge. But I think we've learned how to relatively contain it and mitigate some of the damages that happen. Damages still happen, but we've learned how to sort of mitigate it. Same is a similar analogy here is, for instance, the Gmail spam and phishing filters, right?
Right.
So it's constantly learning, and every time scammers and phishing folks, figure out new ways to sort of try and circumvent it. But when a pattern is detected, systems get updated and new things happen. So I think this is going to be a continuous fight and the incentive of the bad actor is also very high, right? Like if you manage a fraud, the upside is too high. So in
Right.
economics, the largest innovation especially comes from the strongest incentives, economic incentives. So here the incentives are very high on the bad actor side also and on the good actor side also. So I think it's going to be a constant tussle. The key is that we need to build institutions that are in charge of managing this ecosystem to make sure that we are prepared for the fight and the evolution in that fight as it happens.
Understood. Santosh, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it is obviously, as Rohit mentioned, bad actors will be always leading the game, and it happens like a police and chore. Chore is always ahead of police. Okay,
Right.
and this is going to happen, even though there will be tons of solutions, but always that bad actors lead somewhere, and we have to come up with the new more solutions. But this race is not going to stop anywhere. This is going to be there forever. We still, remember when we started using the Gmail or in internet, how those malfunctions or the virus attacks we heard, and it's still happening. I mean, even in today, this 21st century world, we are in the fear that my email will get hacked by somebody else, my phone will get hacked by somebody else, even though there is a lots of good technology available, there is a strong technology available. So race is always there,
Right.
and it is led by the bad actor first, and then the solution comes. So yes.
Understood. Understood. So there are always going to be bad actors. There's always going to be this advancing technology, and we can't really predict who's going to win. We can always just hope to catch up.
I think the
Now
best
coming,
part is to
yeah,
make aware ourselves first,
yes,
uh, understand and act, because
right.
we don't know what will come and when it will come to from the threat where it will come. So it's always going to be a challenge for everyone.
Definitely. And apart from awareness, we were talking about policy earlier, and I want to come back to that. That there is, of course, government policy that is in place, and there's also on the opposite side legitimate use cases of these synthetic media that we spoke about as well, like whether it's accessibility tools, language preservation, and all sorts of use cases that the creative industries end up using. So how do we ensure that the regulatory crackdowns that happen on deepfake don't end up stifling these positives as well?
So, Vaibhavi, if I may, so I think, see, the first is that the regulator has to have an understanding of its own limitations. I think
Right.
sometimes policy goes bad when we think we can do a lot more than what is practically possible. Because
Right.
ultimately, everything is a balancing act. If you overregulate, you will stifle innovation. And the AI advisory that I started with is a case in point, right? So
Hmm.
let's say I tell companies to pre-vet things before they sort of send it forward. Not happening, it will slow down speed to market. And also the bad actors will still not prevent.
Right.
They will just release the software and it will go like, for instance, on the app stores, there are apps that we have no control over. And people also sideload apps, right? So that is one. Second, on threatening social media or basically saying that you have to make sure that it doesn't spread is also not a viable solution, because if the automatic detection softwares, no matter how best in class they are not being able to detect everything. We cannot manually review everything that is uploaded to the internet because the content is too large. So I think the first is a recognition that 100% fix is not possible. So
Right.
therefore, now let's start thinking about what is possible. So the first thing is that to the extent possible, we should try and do water label, marking, labeling, etc. So that, wherever possible, we are able to signal to the user that this is content that has been vetted. Second, we criminalize bad use cases to, there should be a little bit of fear that if you do something wrong. But I think the third most important thing, which is actually the most important solution, which is sometimes discounted, is just the bad content is not the problem. In many cases, the speed of spread is also the problem. So
Right.
when you talk about election disinformation as an example, or electoral manipulation, it's not just that somebody created a bad video, it's also how fast it disseminated and how much damage did it do. So if I'm not able to always control the content creation, can I control or reduce its circulation? Now,
Right.
let me give an analogy that makes it easier to understand. See, even gossip, misinformation, disinformation has been a part of human culture all throughout. Earlier, before the modern means of communication, maybe information would be discussed over in tapri over a chai, and it will slowly spread. So, which means you have the time to correct it. Now
Yeah.
it spreads much faster. So the first thing I need to do is, can I change the incentives? So in the news, so we have been working on, what should be the obligations of social media intermediaries. So how do you design the platform has a big role to play in terms of how fast information spreads. Can I change the incentive for platform design? Are you only designing the platform to spread information which is clickbaity, or are you also allowing other things? So as an example, during the last election, or before that, WhatsApp had made certain restrictions to its platform. Two examples being, one is group size was restricted to 256 people, and you could not forward to multiple groups together. Now that is friction I have introduced in the process through platform design. In comparison, Telegram allows, I don't even remember now, but 200,000 or a lakh users on any particular group. It practically works like a channel. So
Right.
in a single, click, you can send the message to so many people. In WhatsApp, there is friction. And after you have introduced friction, can you allow, things to be slowed down if the algorithm detects that this looks, like a deep fake, or if users start flagging it? Right. So
Hmm.
if we change some of these platform design features and force platforms to design better, then you can reduce the spread. One last example is that oftentimes it is found that with the spread of disinformation, there is a coordinated inauthentic behavior, the term that is often used, which is that it's not that it spreads inadvertently. There is often some actors who are intentionally trying to spread it. So
Right.
usually there are these companies that have built softwares to detect patterns of information flow, and they find that when they're looking at patterns, they realize that content that is maliciously being propagated is centrally emerging from certain nodes, etc. So, the other thing that social media companies and others have started doing is that when you detect these systematic patterns, you hit at the node from which the information is circulating, you cut it off. Right. So these are the kinds of things that have to be policy solutions while recognizing our limitations with regard to what we cannot do.
Understood. Santosh, what do you make of this?
Okay, I think yes. I was just thinking, and what Rohit is said is generation of content is less harmful than the spreading that content
Right.
because probably we'll not able to control the generation of the content, but yes, spreading of that content we can easily control.
Right.
As there are many tools and resources which can use from the policy level, from the individual level, from the all those channels like including WhatsApp or Facebook and Telegram or so and so. So I think regulating of those channels in a proper way, in an effective way, and avoiding of spreading the defect content. I think that is most important, and that something we can control immediately. In
Right.
many times I work in a social sector, we happen to see that some content is created with related to the child, with related to the teachers, or some related to our social sector staff, and that is spread at the speed of anything.
Right.
So as I mentioned earlier mentioned, there will be the bad actors. They will keep creating the content. There are criminals, but I think our job is how we can stop that content at the right time. Whether it's an election, whether it's related to the Bollywood industry, as we see what kind of content they generate and how it's the at what speed it's spread across the country, even across the border. So at
Right.
how we can stop that content from spreading one place to another place at that point of time, it's the most crucial and I think most effective, which I feel.
Understood. And this is also
And I think even
something
the media has a good role in that. I think all
definitely.
media, I'm not saying
Yeah.
that print media or digital media, but all media, which is the key channel of spreading any content. So that is something needs to be controlled from the policy level and from the each and every individual level.
Definitely. And this has got me wondering, and I'm also getting some questions from our viewers who are watching this live, that should we be then investing in more in detection technology and authentication systems, or should we then be building some sort of societal resilience to this kind of digital content, or should it be both? Because this is also something that our viewers are wondering, and what I was also going to ask as a follow-up. So, Rohit, what do you think? Is it going to be both, or it has to be one or the other?
I think it is both because the content detection, etc., is definitely needed to reduce volume of what you get hit with. If you don't
Right.
invest in detection, takedown, flagging, then our brains are just going to get overwhelmed with the number of things that we get hit with where we are not sure whether this is
Right.
fake or real. So I think from a volumes game perspective, that is absolutely essential. But having said that, something or the other will definitely slip through. Again, taking the example of malware or taking the example of phishing emails, etc.
Yeah.
We are starting to teach. I have been having conversations with my mother and even younger people in the family that these are the telltale signs you need to watch for.
Yeah.
So there is that trust, but verification before you sort of act on something is needed, and that resilience has to be built through the educational system through exposure to some of these things. Because my other worry is that let's say, and Santosh was giving the example of people in rural areas. Now, my biggest worry is that cyber fraud is increasing, right? And so let's say there's a person we very with a lot of difficulty managed to financially include digitally, and they've started using UPI or something. And let's say they get hit by one fraud where money is returned
Right.
from their account, you would lose that person forever. You will not be able to get them back into the digital space again. So I think
Definitely.
the stakes are very high, and we need to hit at both. But we also have to realize that the government alone can't, the tech is something that the private sector will be able to do the best. So we need to align the private sector's incentives. So you need a regulatory institution that gets the private system sector to act. And through legislation, you align their incentives. So you are saying that I want to see that you've built systems internally to be able to try and detect to the extent possible. You are deploying best of class technology. And as long as you're doing that and still something slips through, that is fine. But if you don't deploy these systems, you may be penalized. Stuff
Got
like
it. Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Now, Santosh, there's a question that I want to pose to you specifically because you work in the social sector, like you said, and we were talking about policy before about how ultimately a lot of the answers to the questions that we are raising here in this discussion are going to come from policy side of things. Now, this deepfake is also a discussion which is happening globally, and everybody, all the governments are sort of coming up with ways to either combat them or control them. So, do you think global cooperation on deepfake governance is also something that's realistic, or do you think there's going to be a fragmented response coming in from all players in that space?
I think working globally is important because this is not the challenge of one country. This is the challenge of across the world.
Right.
Okay, working with the cross border is very, very important. And I think what I was reading somewhere that UNESCO has already started working on that and making some policies which will be universally accepted in the
Right.
AI. So yes, I think we have to work together with all the the countries and be prepared for this the challenge. I want to add the earlier question as well, what the Rohit mentioned.
Sure.
You know, it's not that one we can target, or it is not that one is important, one is the not important or least important. It is both. But if you look at the population, if you look at the speed of, or if you look at what is more easy, whether it's building a new technology, it's building a new tech to prevent the AI, or which is more easy to reach out to the billion of people and make them aware. I think very recently, if you call someone just 1 month back, there could be a caller tune where Amitabh Bachchan, in his voice, he would be saying how to prevent the
Yeah.
cybercrime.
Yeah.
I think everybody took that seriously, or maybe most of the people could get the awareness that, okay, this is happening and we should be aware. We should protect our bank. We should protect our, password. We should protect our IDs. So I think awareness, I would say the awareness is first important, um, because the country with the 1.3 billion of people, so I think we need to be aware, most of the people. That is the first, and yes, the technology will come the second, because technology, even if comes, there will be a bad actors who will try to defend that technology. But if we all are aware how to use the technology, I think the most of the time we could save the challenges from the AI.
Definitely, definitely. Thanks for that, Santosh. That does make us think a lot about how we want to approach this problem overall, and how general awareness can play a lot of a very major role in being able to sort of arm us against something that's not really going to stop. Now, from within our viewers, we have gotten a question that is for Rohit. They are asking, one of the viewers is asking, in your opinion, which specific uses of AI or AI-driven content, if any, ought to be outright banned irrespective of context?
I think some of it is already banned. Like, for instance, impersonation without, like, using somebody's identity without their consent, is something
Right.
that is, and in our laws currently, these are disallowed. For instance, in the Indian Penal Code, in the IT Act, also, some of these are not allowed. Then, using these kinds of technology to create nude images, nude videos, etc. All of that is banned already. So I think where harm is likely to result, that has to be banned, and these are already disallowed under law. The question is simply how easy or difficult is it going to be to enforce what the law says.
Right.
I think
Understood.
what has disallowed in the physical world and otherwise is already the same provisions kind of
Taken care of.
apply. So there's nothing new per se there, but yes. So that's the take. Yeah.
Understood. Understood. Now, we are nearing the end of our time here, but I don't want to let both of you go without your opinion on this. So this is for both of you. This is a little bit futuristic, so you can put your thinking caps on for this one. But looking ahead, maybe 3 or 5 years into the future, we are also moving beyond just video deepfakes. That's sort of where it started, but now we're also getting into synthetic voices, real time, and the real time generation of these things. And AI can now create entire personas, most of which is also being used by creative people around us. So, what do you think the government, institutions, or general public should be making of this now? And this is also one of our most asked questions. What can the general public do to sort of be aware and sort of be on their guard about these things that they are obviously facing on all platforms that they're using these days? So, what do you think they should be making of this? Just in a short manner, if both of you could just sum this up for us.
Santosh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can. I think the most of the population, they should have the basic media checking skills to be very to begin with. Blindly, we should not just believe in that content. So the basic media checking skill we should adopt, we should learn, and I'm sure there are many tools, platforms are available. We should engage more and more the schools and institutes, because they are the larger part of our society, the children, student, youth. how we can engage them. That is what we are doing, working in the education sector, education space. We are engaging students from across all the schools and institutes to make sure that how we can get protected from the fake AI content. And obviously, they should learn the AI as well for the good things. So
Right.
yes, the basic media checking skills is most important, and the basic ethics we should follow. I think that is what something we are missing on the basic ethics. Just believing in the content, sharing with other group, and keep getting forwarded to the millions of groups. So yes, I because I work more on the human side, so I believe that yes, ethics and some certain basic skills are most important to make sure that in future we should be ready to tackle this situation.
Understood. Rohit, want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think the problem is only going to become more grave. In fact, when these audio, this thing had also been released, I think OpenAI had started to release it in some parts of the world, but they held it back
Yeah.
before the elections because they were worried that it's going to be absolutely misused. I
Yeah.
think there are some estimates which even suggest that up to 90% of all content on the internet by 2026 is going to be synthetically edited, generated in some format or the other. So I think we are going to be hit by a wave of this. There may be personas of people across social media who do not exist. And there's some likeness that is created. So this idea of seeing is believing is definitely going to break down. So I second what Santosh was saying, that building resilience of people to be able to handle this kind of stuff is first and foremost the very important thing. But as we know, when ultimately solutions rely on individual effort, oftentimes they break down. So government will have a very big role to play here. And reiterating what I was saying earlier, first is that some of these things about disclosures and transparency. So if you are using an AI generated persona on a particular platform, the platform policy and the law should require you to disclose it. Otherwise, that will be taken down. For instance, there have to be more transparency. There have to be more standards, interoperable standards like C2PA, as we were discussing. And then there have to be, we have to get the platforms to redesign for sharing. What circulates, how does it circulate, how does it get flagged, what gets taken down. I think we have to ready for a world where synthetic content is going to be a part of everyday life. And these are some hygiene things we will have to do to minimize damage, is where I would leave it at.
Understood. Understood. Great. Thanks so much to both of you. Deepfakes is a very important conversation because probably as soon as we get off this live stream, the first thing that we see is probably going to be an AI generated image or an AI generated post somewhere. So I'm very grateful that both of you were able to give us insights about this, and the fact that we have come up with at least two things that need to be done. Policy intervention is extremely important, and general awareness of the public is very important when dealing with digital synthetic content, because it's not going down anytime soon. All we can do is try to catch up with the pace of it. So that's a wrap on this conversation and a wrap on today's panel. So thanks for everybody who stayed tuned to these, and thanks to Rohit and Santosh as well for speaking to me today. And thanks to everybody else who was watching. And for more news and views, please keep logged in to ET. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.